Hello and welcome back to Debate Decoder. Before we get started today, I wanted to thank everyone who watched the first video and left comments. Um, some viewers pointed out that my explanations of fallacies seemed elementary, and that is true in one sense. Debate Decoder is designed to make these concepts clear and accessible to everyone, not just debate coaches or philosophy majors. I also saw some comments saying I misapplied certain fallacies, like appeal to fear or straw man. So, just to clarify, an appeal to fear doesn't require offering a solution. It's about using fear in place of evidence. And a straw man happens when someone misrepresents another's argument. For example, turning don't just pray into prayer is stupid. You might still disagree with how I apply these definitions, and that's fine. My goal here isn't to tell you what to think, but to give you tools to recognize rhetorical moves that sound persuasive but don't logically hold up. So, with that said, let's jump in today's breakdown. Today, we're looking at full gaggle. Stephen Miller takes questions from reporters outside the White House. Across just 18 minutes, Miller answers questions on immigration, visas, crime, and foreign policy. Along the way, he uses at least 8 logical fallacies that make his rhetoric sound stronger than it is. Let's have even more fun and decode them with facts.
In California, they will not be handed over to ICE. They'll be released at time and place unknown, and then ICE will have to go searching for weeks, months to find them. And in many cases, those aliens will go on to commit additional serious offenses, including oftentimes, as we've seen over and over again, rape and murder. And so that is the reason why it's so essential to prioritize enforcement in sanctuary cities.
Okay, friends, this is Hasty Generalization and Appeal to Fear. Miller takes anecdotal cases of undocumented immigrants committing crimes and generalizes it into a systemic rule. So here are the facts. A 2020 Stanford study found sanctuary policies had no measurable increase in violent crime. Crime rates stayed flat. Research from the Cato Institute shows immigrants, both legal and undocumented, are less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans. So instead of data, Stephen Miller is leaning on frightening stories, and that is fear, not evidence.
We found a lot of cases where someone applied for a student visa, they got it, and then 11 years later, they're still in that same status. At that point in time, obviously, your education would clearly be over. So just making sure, it's a way to cut down on fraud, to make sure that foreign students are actually being educated at schools and are not just staying on that status without actually being enrolled students.
And journalists?
This is another hasty generalization where Miller implies widespread fraud by citing unspecified cases. So here are the facts. In 2019, there were over 1 million active F1 student visas. The Department of Homeland Security reported only a tiny fraction overstayed each year, like approximately 2%. So, yes, abuse can happen and does, but painting the whole category as fraudulent is misleading.
Why would it be coercion to send somebody to Uganda?
They said it was possible coercion. They didn't make.
No, I'm just, yes. It was a rhetorical question, which I'll address. But so first of all, this is the issue with crazy liberal judges everywhere is people who are a clear flight risk, a clear threat to public safety, get released over and over and over again. We see that here in Washington, D.C., not in the immigration context, but you see individuals all the time who are charged with extremely serious crimes. They are released on their own recognizance, and they go on to commit robbery, muggings, carjackings, murder. I mean, I've seen example after example of extremely serious felony, including homicides, where the individual would have been in jail but for the fact that they were released by a judge. Obviously, the U.S. government was someone who is at extreme flight and public safety risk, like Garcia. We are not going to allow them to be on the street where they can engage. I mean, this is someone, as you know, who's not only a member of a terrorist organization, who's not only been accused of battery, but who's been accused of grave crimes against children. This is not someone we're going to allow to be out on the street. Now, so the point about Uganda, you just have to marvel at this. The same left-wing NGOs who tell us that we should open our borders to all the poor countries of the world also tell us that it would be unfair, improper to have anybody live in those countries. Well, if those countries don't have good systems of law and good systems of governance, then why would we want to have open migration from those countries? So these two propositions are in complete conflict. But more fundamentally, remember, Garcia has said he doesn't want to go back home to El Salvador. That's what he said. So we're honoring that request by providing him with an alternate place to live. We're not a travel booking agency. It's not our job to say to illegal alien terrorists, pick your favorite destination in the world and we'll send you a charter jet there. We have countries that have very graciously agreed to help resettle nationals from other countries, which is a great benefit to the United States. And obviously, that's something that Garcia is eligible for.
Stephen,
There is a lot to unpack here, so please bear with me. All right, the part about the issue with crazy liberal judges everywhere is a clear-cut ad hominem attack. And it combines with a hasty generalization. Instead of addressing legal standards, Stephen Miller labels judges as crazy liberals and generalizes all rulings he dislikes as reckless. The facts are judges of all backgrounds sometimes release defendants pre-trial. It's not that unusual. That is built into U.S. bail law. And studies show pre-trial release overwhelmingly does not lead to reoffending. You can cherry pick cases, and that I guess that could be another argument of a fallacy. So going on to the next part, he then builds a straw man, saying critics want to open borders and believe those countries are unlivable. That's not what's argued. It's a distortion that makes his opponents easier to attack. But the breakdown happens like this. NGOs don't literally advocate open borders. I mean, some might, but most push for human asylum processes and due process under U.S. and international law. Recasting that as let all the poor countries come in is a clear distortion. Miller collapses several debates, actually, including asylum law, deportation processes, and NGO advocacy into one oversimplified claim. And this is where he introduces a false dichotomy, in which he frames the options as either accept unlimited migration or admit those countries are so bad no one should ever be deported there. But NGOs aren't saying that all countries are unlivable. They're raising legal concerns about deportations, like whether Garcia's case involved coercion, not passing judgment on every nation. So finally, enter the appeal to ridicule. Phrases like, we're not a travel agency for terrorists, are designed to mock, not reason. They make due process sound absurd instead of addressing it seriously. This is a classic rhetorical shortcut. By reducing a complex policy debate, or several debates actually, into a cartoonish choice, Miller makes his argument sound airtight, but only because he's removed the real alternatives. All right, moving on.
President Trump has achieved 7 peace deals in 7 months. No president in history has done more to advance the cause of peace. He's been nominated by multiple world leaders for the Nobel Peace Prize. Literally no president, not just in our lifetimes, but that I can think of in American history, and no world leader anywhere today, anywhere on earth, has done more to advance world peace than President Trump. He's ended the conflict between Israel and Iran. He's ended the conflict between Rwanda and Congo, between India and Pakistan, Azerbaijan. I mean, example after example after example. And obviously, he's working steadfastly to end the killing in Ukraine. And keep in mind, this is President Biden's war. It started because of President Biden, and President Trump inherited President Biden's war, and he's working steadfastly to end the killing. And that's something that everyone in the world should celebrate.
The 7 peace deals claim is an example of overgeneralization combined with unsupported superlative. Trump claims he ended 7 wars, averaging 1 a month. But here's the reality. Only 2 were formal peace agreements. Those are the ones between Rwanda and DRC in June, and Armenia and Azerbaijan in August. Ones like the Israel-Iran ceasefire or Cambodia-Thailand dialogue are more tentative or limited efforts. Others he calls wars, like India, Pakistan, or Egypt, Ethiopia, Nile negotiations. They never fully escalated to war. So, conflating these with ended wars is misleading and glosses over nuance. Then he goes on to say that keep in mind this is President Biden's war, etc. This is framed as a false cause fallacy. The Ukraine war did begin during Biden's presidency, unless you count the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And yes, Trump later inherited it as an ongoing issue when he returned to office in 2025. But that's not the same thing as saying Biden caused it. By saying it started because of Biden, Miller suggests Biden was the direct cause of Russia's invasion. That ignores Russia's choices, NATO's expansion tensions, and years of buildup since 2014. So while it's fair to say Trump inherited the war as an unresolved conflict, it's misleading to say Biden caused it. That's oversimplification, not sound reasoning.
This is now widely understood and widely acknowledged. And CDC used to be, of course, or seen widely around the world as a premier health agency. And much of the world discovered in the last few years that CDC was actually staffed by a lot of very partisan, very political bureaucrats who weren't at all concerned about public health and weren't actually very knowledgeable about public health. And we are working hard. And more importantly, Secretary Kennedy, one of the world's foremost voices, advocates, and experts on public health, is working hard to restore the credibility and the integrity of CDC as a scientific organization committed to the scientific method and getting to the root causes of the public health epidemic in this country.
This is called poisoning the well. And there is also an appeal to authority in here. So Stephen Miller discredits the CDC wholesale, then elevates one figure, RFK Jr., as the ultimate expert. But the facts are CDC staff are or were career scientists. Pandemic missteps were real, but labeling them partisan hacks is rhetoric, not proof. An individual's title, such as Secretary of Health and Human Services, doesn't automatically validate their claims. That's the definition of a misused authority appeal. RFK Jr. does not possess public health expertise of any kind.
And I can say on a personal level, as somebody who has lived in this area for 2 decades, the transformation has been breathtaking. And we hear every day from members of the community, but particularly from longtime members of the community and native Washingtonians, been here for many years, some cases whose families have been here for many years, that they're just overflowing with gratitude at how safe and clean the city has become and how the parks are open again and the sidewalks are clean again and they're not worried about getting shot or mugged or carjacked. The president has the authority under both that statute as well as inherent Article 2 authorities to maintain control of the federal and local policing in the city for as long as he may desire. But at a more fundamental level, the key point is that this is the capital city of the United States, and the president is going to do whatever is necessary in order to ensure that the capital is the safest big city in the country. And of course, we want all cities to be the safest that they could possibly be. But here right now in the nation's capital, this is a historic effort to transform our nation's capital into something that is the envy of the world in terms of beauty, in terms of safety, in terms of community. And it really is a wonderful thing to watch that happening. But there are a lot of deep systemic challenges we have to overcome. There are scores of organized street crews in this city that are comprised of career criminals that are engaged in narcotics trafficking and weapons trafficking and organized gang violence that represent a severe, acute public safety threat to this city. And we have DEA, FBI, ATF, and every federal law enforcement agency working to root out the chronic gang violence in this community and liberate this city for the people who live here. And it really is, it's an extraordinary thing that is happening right now. Nowhere in the history of our country has such a dramatic improvement been made in such a short time, but this is just beginning. And
Pretty much all of this is anecdotal evidence combined with hyperbole. He cites personal conversations and sweeping praise instead of data. The facts are that FBI data shows DC did not experience a record breaking drop. Violent crime trends remain complex. Phrases like nowhere in history are exaggerations meant to impress, not to inform.
I'm going to be very clear. The president has said actually going back to the campaign, and then from day one of this presidency and the early executive orders, criminal cartels in this hemisphere are foreign terrorist organizations that present a clear and present danger to the American people. There are no organizations on this planet that are responsible for more dead Americans than the criminal cartels, the narco traffickers that are operating in the Western Hemisphere.
This is actually, I think, maybe two or three fallacy examples. So we have an unsupported superlative and an ambiguity fallacy. Miller never clarifies whether he means direct violence or indirect deaths through drugs. That's a big difference. And I think it would be valuable to decode it. So cartels do kill Americans directly, but numbers are relatively limited. In Mexico, Americans have been kidnapped or killed in cartel violence and border spillover. Some U.S. citizens are murdered in cross-border hits. And then inside the U.S., rare cases of targeted killings happen, but they are not large scale. These numbers are, of course, tragic, but not the largest organizational death toll in U.S. history. If you look at indirect killings via fentanyl and drugs, cartels, especially Sinaloa and CJNG, dominate the fentanyl trade. Synthetic opioids killed 70,000 Americans in 2022 alone. But these deaths come through drug use, not cartel soldiers shooting Americans. The causal chain is cartel production leads to trafficking, leads to distribution, leads to overdose. As a comparison, organizations and U.S. deaths break down things that have actually happened. So in World War II, the Axis powers actually did succeed in killing 405,399 U.S. persons. And that was during combat years of 1941 to 1945. Al-Qaeda, in 9/11, they killed 2,977 people in a single day. ISIS, between the years of 2014 and 2019, killed hundreds of U.S. civilians and military members. And then Mexican cartels, he's talking about Venezuelan cartels as well. 70,000 U.S. overdose deaths annually occurred, but the number is small when you're talking about real direct killings. So Miller's claim falls apart in two ways. The unsupported superlative, obviously we see that from the numbers that Axis powers alone killed more Americans in World War II than cartels ever have. And then in terms of ambiguity, he blurs direct violence with indirect overdose deaths, making cartels sound like the #1 historical killer of Americans. Cartels are a real threat, but they're not uniquely the deadliest organization in history.
This is a simple choice. You either side with civilization or you side with anarchy and violence. And so President Trump is proud to be using federal law enforcement and our National Guard to make this city safe and peaceful for Americans, and he stands ready to help and assist any community that wishes to be liberated from these criminal elements that are such a dire threat to the freedom and tranquility of the American people.
This is a false dichotomy. Crime policy is not a binary choice between civilization or anarchy. There are dozens of approaches, including reforms to bail, policing, economic policy, education. By forcing only two choices, Miller oversimplifies a complex issue into good versus evil. So to wrap up, in just 18 minutes, Stephen Miller deployed at least 8 fallacies: hasty generalizations, appeals to fear, straw men, ad hominems, overgeneralizations, unsupported superlatives, hyperbole, and false dichotomies. Each move makes rhetoric sound persuasive on the surface, but once you bring in facts, the logic collapses.